Sex education, a subject that continues to spark debate, policy changes, and cultural conversations across the globe. But have you ever wondered how it all began? How did we go from centuries of silence and taboo to comprehensive sex ed programs in schools and global campaigns about reproductive health? The history of sex education is not just about biology or schools, it's a journey through religion, politics, social norms, and the evolving understanding of human rights. In this video, we'll explore how sex education started, how it changed over time, and what it means for us today. Let's start from the beginning, ancient civilizations. You might be surprised to learn that in many ancient societies, sex wasn't always treated as a taboo subject. In ancient Egypt, for example, sexual practices, fertility, and reproduction were openly discussed in literature and art. Egyptians even had papyri that described contraceptive methods and pregnancy testing. Ancient Greece also had open dialogues about love, sexuality, and relationships. Philosophers like Plato and Aristotle wrote about human desires and gender roles. Even in ancient India, the Kama Sutra wasn't just an erotic book, it also discussed emotional intimacy, compatibility, and the importance of mutual consent. So, in some ways, early societies were more comfortable discussing sex than many cultures are today. However, this openness didn't last forever. With the rise of organized religions like Christianity and Islam, discussions around sexuality became more restricted, especially in the Middle Ages. Religious teachings often promoted abstinence, and sex was considered sinful unless it was for procreation within marriage. As religious institutions gained influence over education systems, any talk of sex or reproductive knowledge was either moralized or suppressed. During the medieval period in Europe, most people received their sex education informally, through religious sermons, parental warnings, or word of mouth, which often led to myths, misinformation, and shame surrounding sexual topics. Things started to change gradually during the Renaissance and Enlightenment eras. As scientific thinking expanded and scholars began questioning religious dogmas, there was renewed interest in human anatomy and medicine. Doctors and anatomists began studying the human body more deeply, including the reproductive system. But still, this information was reserved for the elite, primarily men, and not shared widely. The general population, especially women, remained largely uninformed. By the 19th century, things took a strange turn. Instead of open dialogue, the topic of sex was often reduced to warnings about moral decay. In both Europe and America, the Industrial Revolution brought massive social changes, urbanization, more independence for young people, and unfortunately, the rise of sexually transmitted infections like syphilis. These developments pushed governments and health reformers to think about sex education as a public health issue. However, most of these early efforts were driven by fear rather than understanding. In Victorian England and America, moral purity movements aimed to control sexual behavior, especially among youth. One notable figure was Sylvester Graham, yes, the man behind the Graham cracker, who believed that bland food and self-control could reduce sexual urges. Another was Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, who advocated celibacy and even created cornflakes as part of his anti-masturbation crusade. Yes, really. During this time, sex education was less about science and more about teaching discipline, shame, and guilt. But as we entered the 20th century, the world began to change, and with it, so did attitudes towards sex education. The turning point came during World War I, when the U.S. military was shocked to discover that a significant number of its soldiers were suffering from venereal diseases. This led to the government launching a public health campaign to prevent STIs, marking one of the first large-scale efforts in sex education. However, the focus was still on disease prevention and morality, not pleasure, consent, or emotional relationships. In the 1920s and 1930s, a few brave educators and scientists started advocating for a more comprehensive approach to sex education. One of the pioneers was Dr. Mary Calderone, who would later become the founder of SECUS, the Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States, in 1964. Calderone argued that sexuality was a natural and healthy part of life and that young people deserved accurate, age-appropriate information. Her work laid the foundation for modern sex education in America. During the 1940s and 50s, sex education began appearing more formally in schools, although the content was still very limited. The programs focused heavily on hygiene, anatomy, and gender roles, with an emphasis on abstinence and the nuclear family. Around the same time, Alfred Kintz's groundbreaking research challenged societal views on sexuality. His reports, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, 1948, and Sexual Behavior in the Human Female, 1953, revealed that sexual behavior was far more diverse than people thought. Although controversial, Kintz's work opened the door for more honest discussions about sexuality. Then came the sexual revolution of the 1960s and 70s. With the rise of feminism, the civil rights movement, and LGBTQ+ advocacy, people began questioning traditional values around gender, sex, and relationships. The availability of birth control, especially the pill, gave women greater control over their reproductive health. These decades saw a surge in demand for sex education that included not just the biological side but also topics like consent, sexual orientation, contraception, and gender identity. However, this progress didn't come without backlash. The 1980s brought the HIV/AIDS crisis, which reignited public concern about sexuality and health. Many conservative groups pushed for abstinence-only education, claiming that comprehensive sex education encouraged promiscuity. In response, some governments rolled back inclusive programs, especially in the EU, where federal funding was directed toward abstinence-based curricula. Yet research consistently showed that these programs were less effective in preventing teen pregnancy and STIs. By the 1990s and early 2000s, countries around the world took different paths. In places like the Netherlands, Sweden, and Germany, comprehensive sex education became part of school curricula, often starting as early as kindergarten. These programs emphasized respect, communication, and understanding the emotional aspects of relationships. The result? These countries reported lower rates of teen pregnancies and STIs compared to countries with abstinence-only programs. Meanwhile, in many parts of the global south, including Asia, Africa, and Latin America, sex education faced significant cultural and religious barriers. In these regions, non-governmental organizations often stepped in where public education systems failed. Programs like UNESCO's Comprehensive Sexuality Education Initiative helped create global guidelines for age-appropriate, inclusive content. However, implementation remained inconsistent due to local resistance, misinformation, and lack of political will. In recent years, the internet has become a double-edged sword in the realm of sex education. On one hand, young people now have more access to information than ever before. On the other hand, they're also exposed to misinformation, unrealistic depictions of sex in pornography, and online harassment. This makes formal, school-based sex education more important than ever, not just for teaching biology, but for fostering healthy attitudes about relationships, consent, and identity in a digital world. Today, the debate continues. In many countries, people are still arguing over what should be taught, when, and by whom. Some advocate for abstinence-only approaches, others push for LGBTQ+ inclusive and gender-sensitive content. And while progress has been made, millions of young people still grow up without access to accurate, shame-free sexual education. So, what's the takeaway from this history? Sex education didn't emerge overnight. It evolved out of necessity, driven by public health crises, social movements, and scientific discoveries. It's been shaped by culture, religion, and politics, and it continues to reflect our values and fears as a society. But one thing remains clear: the more informed we are, the better choices we can make, not just about sex, but about our relationships, health, and futures. Sex education is not just about preventing problems, it's about empowering individuals to understand their bodies, respect others, and build healthy, fulfilling lives. As we move forward, the challenge will be to ensure that every young person, no matter where they live, has access to the knowledge and support they need to thrive. Thanks for watching. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might find it helpful. Drop a comment below. What do you think should be included in modern sex education? Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.